In the new year, there will undoubtedly be a lot on everyone's mind. First, selectmen and mayors across the state know this all too well as they pick up where they left off, leading their towns and cities through budgeting, a new General Assembly, as well as the normal day-to-day operations of municipal life. Bethel First Selectman Matt Knickerbocker joins us today to talk about his expectations as the new year begins. We'd like to thank our premier sponsor at Digital Back Office Palo Alto Networks. Check them out at digitalbackoffice.com or paloaltonetworks.com, as well as their sponsors at Gateway and Housatonic Community Colleges. The Municipal Voice is the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities podcast in collaboration with WNHH LP 103.5 FM. I'm your host, Matt Ford. As always, be sure to give us a like and let us know what you're thinking in the comments below. CCM's Municipal Voice podcast continues to present a key forum on important state-local issues. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the consensus views of CCM or member municipal leaders. First Selectman, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for the opportunity. Glad to be here.
So I think it's been said across the board that 2020 was a pretty crazy year. With everything that went on, how did Bethel do? How did Bethel fare?
Well, we've had our challenges just like every other town. You call it a crazy year. I've heard a lot of words used to describe 2020. Not all of them are repeatable on this podcast, but many, many challenges. I feel very fortunate here in Bethel. We are coming through it very well. We have a great school system here. We have great leadership in our schools. We have a really tight community and a tight chamber of commerce where people are supporting one another. Just to give you a real brief example, donations to our food bank program, which is coordinated with the Brotherhood in Action Group and the local churches and our own social services department.
Yeah.
They've run so many food drives that I've kind of lost track of the number, and the turnout has been great. Our senior center is closed for programs because obviously that's a very vulnerable population. So the staff is calling seniors to do well checks. We even have something that made national news not too long ago. The sharks. I don't know. Have you heard about the sharks? The shark.
No.
Okay, I don't have a visual to show you, but there are two individuals that have these gigantic inflatable shark costumes. They are hilarious, and nobody knows who they are. It's a guarded secret. So these two people, they're rumored to be a couple of college students who live here in town, and what they do is they just show up in places and just walk around and greet people. There's no verbal communication, so it's all done by mind, and it's just done as a feel good to just try to bring some levity to this year that there's been so many challenges and people dealing with this pandemic. So this has become so popular that there is a organization which is it's a local news outlet, an online news outlet that is making shark bumper stickers that says shark crossing, and the proceeds from these go to the food bank to help.
Oh, that's cool. Okay, so for a good cause.
Oh yeah, it's great. So the morale of the town is good. There's people really trying to help each other out, and financially, there's, as I'm sure every town is going to tell you this time of year, the extraordinary expenses that have occurred. I think we're over $1.5 million in additional expenses just getting the schools ready. The plexiglass shields, all the things that you need to do to keep kids safe. We've had the same thing happen here in Town Hall. We've made adjustments. A tremendous amount of money being spent. Now we're fortunate. Bethel has, we have a AAA bond rating. We have done a great job in the last, say, 10, 12 years in shoring up our finances and putting a really strong fund balance in place. So we've got a rainy day fund that can handle it.
Yeah.
But, later today, I'm going to be meeting with Senator Chris Murphy to talk about the COVID situation and the vaccine distribution. And one of the things I'm really going to stress is, and I know that our delegation is on board, is the COVID Relief Act does not include funding for state governments or local governments. And, we're looking at starting a vaccine clinic within the next 4 weeks. That's going
in
to
Bethel.
run anywhere from $4,000 to $6,000 per day to
Mhm.
run. And right now that's just right now coming out of Bethel taxpayer pockets. So
Yeah.
it's the kind of thing where we're lucky, we're doing well, we've prepared well enough that we
Mhm.
can handle it so far. But some things have to change in the future because
Yeah.
we're still going to go through another 8 or 9 months before this thing.
Mhm. Well, that's something I wanted to talk about too, because we all know that 2020 was really bad, but we're coming into 2021. It's kind of a chance to at least mentally kind of turn the page a little bit.
Yeah.
So you've got the budgeting season coming up.
Yep.
How do you prepare a budget with so many unknowns? You mentioned some of the costs from last year, but
Yeah.
we've got a vaccine hopefully coming, but that'll cost money, and in between now and then we're still going to need a lot of personal protection.
Yep.
Equipment, a lot of services. So how do you budget for the unknown, and what kind of conversations do you have about that with like your health department in terms of their ongoing needs?
Well, it's going to be a budget season that, even though tax collections remain high, and I think for many of my colleagues that in some cases their tax collection rates are still higher than they were this time a year ago. We don't expect that that's going to continue. We're not really forecasting a big hit to revenue, but in terms of the additional costs, that's a bigger concern. Yeah. And the budget season is going to be very, very sparse. It's going to be very sparse, I should say.
Yeah.
We're gonna. There aren't going to be any wish list items on it. It's going to be the things that we really need to do. We're going to need to replace, say, the expiring breathing apparatus in the fire department, and we're going to have some money in road construction just to deal with the maintenance. You can't let some of those things go away. But in terms of anything new, any new initiatives, it's just not going to be there. Right? We're going to have to put as much contingency as possible into these unknowns until we have a better handle on what those costs are, if there's going to be any reimbursement from either the state or federal level. So it's going to be a kind of a no fun budget season, I think.
Yeah.
I think my colleagues are probably all in the same boat.
Yeah. You mentioned that so far your tax collection's been going okay. Do you have you seen an influx of people coming in real estate wise, being over in Fairfield County? Has that been a factor this year?
Our property transfers are pretty much setting records right now. Bethel has been growing anyway. We're kind of in a unique position where we're in a very desirable location. It's a very pretty town. People want to live here. Our town has been growing. I think since the 2010 census, we've grown over 6%, and that's just accelerated even more in the last 6 or 8 months.
Yeah.
So new construction is still booming right along. There's been no slowdown, and real estate values and the rapidity of transfers and length of time on the market is showing a very, very healthy market right now. So we are seeing the effect of what has been reported in the press for some time now is employees who live in urban centers or were commuting have realized they can be just as productive, if not more so, working from home.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing is our building department, our land use department is just off the scale busy with people doing renovations.
Okay.
So we are seeing investments into people saying, well, if I'm going to work from home from now on, I'm going to make it really nice. And I'm going to renovate that room that we've been talking about. I'm going to put that addition on the house. So there is just no let up, which is kind of a tough thing to deal with because, we're not in a position to go out and hire more staff. That takes some time to add headcount, but the burden on the current staff right now is really ramped up. It's tough for them to get their work done.
Well, it sounds like a challenge, but it also sounds hopeful for the economic outlook of the town.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. You also have experience, in addition to me, for a selectman, with the Board of Ed. How do you expect school budgets to play out in this coming year? And do you think remote learning will remain kind of an ongoing factor from here out?
Well, that's a good question. I think it's going to remain, remote learning is going to be an option that will continue to exist. But I do know that our Board of Ed and our superintendent are really pretty much in lockstep with the governor, as am I, that the best place for kids to learn and get the right social development and exposure is in the classroom setting.
Yeah.
So our school leadership has remained very focused on keeping kids in classrooms, even if it's hybrid. And they've had to back that down in some cases. They've had to isolate some classes and go to all distance learning for periods of time
Mhm.
to handle, exposures or
Yeah.
staff that couldn't be in the building for whatever reason. But the goal is to always get them back in the classroom as quickly as possible and as
Mhm.
safely as possible. And I'm very happy to say that we have had no direct transmissions that we're aware of in the schools at this point.
That's great.
We've had some kids who were exposed, but they were not
Mhm.
exposed in the school settings, and they've been taught. You have to rely on parents to do the right thing. If they know there's been an exposure, let's say they have a family get together and Uncle Sam, calls up the next day and says,
Mhm.
hey, I got a sore throat and a fever. I think I might have it. You got to keep the kids out of school. But
Yeah.
we've been getting pretty good cooperation with the parents to do that
Mhm.
thing. So far, I think our track record in keeping kids in school has been pretty successful.
Yeah. It sounds like you just need to kind of stay nimble and be able to change as the situation changes and respond quickly to the individual problems you may have.
Yeah, nimble is the right word. That's for
Yeah.
sure. Yep, you got to be nimble and flexible and ready to move on a dime. So
Yeah.
that's what they're doing.
On to something a little bit different. One of the more important factors in the new year is the General Assembly is getting together and putting together a state budget.
Mhm.
As some of our viewers might know, the General Assembly was essentially postponed last year, kind of at the beginning of the pandemic. They, had to close up the Capitol, leaving a few bills that were discussed to be voted on in special sessions. It's expected that some of those things that did get debated last year will be picked up again this year. One of those that Hartford Current is talking about is a question of what the legislature will do to help rebuild municipalities.
Yeah.
Specifically, where arts, organizations, theaters, restaurants, retail shops have been kind of decimated by the coronavirus pandemic.
Yep.
What should the legislature do in that arena as far as helping out?
Well, these are the same issues that municipalities have been struggling with for some time now.
Mhm.
The pandemic has just made them worse.
Mhm.
By magnitudes that are pretty big.
Mhm.
We still have issues with the state not providing the correct amount of funding for things like special education.
Mhm.
School construction has been limited in recent years. They've had to cut back on that. We had to wait for, I can't remember how many months it was, 18 months for Town Aid Road. So the level of support from the state to municipalities is still an issue. It's becoming a bigger issue. But to go back to that comment I made a few minutes ago, in dealing specifically with the pandemic, yes, our business community needs help. It's a shame that the $2,000 payment relief payment per person was not passed by the Congress in this past session. But above that, the one of the two parties has said, well, that's a little excessive. You need to target it to the people who really need it. And I would say in a nonpartisan way, okay, that's right. So let's do that. Let's target that relief to the restaurants. Let's target that relief to the small family and single owner retailers. Let's target that relief to the gig employees who have no backup and no health insurance, which is a shameful thing for this nation. That's my political comment for the day. But if we need to target it, then let's do that, because those are real issues. We've watched several restaurants close their doors for good. We've lost a couple of nice retail shops that closed their doors for good. And that is not going to get any easier for those people. They're doing the best they can, but there is going to need to be, this is not only a national crisis, this is a global crisis. I use an example today in talking to a citizen here in town. Imagine that it is January 5th, 1942.
Mhm.
And Pearl Harbor was just attacked very successfully, crippled the U.S. fleet, and now enemy troops are landing on the shores of California. They're actually landing, and the federal government says, well, that's California's problem. That's not our problem. Essentially, that's what I look at That's my attitude about how the federal government is responding to this crisis. They put together Operation Warp Speed. Vaccines are coming out, but everything else has been left at the state and local level.
Yeah.
And we just don't have the resources to really do this effectively. There needs to be a stronger national response, and that includes funding for those businesses. Just go back to the Great Depression in the 1930s and look at all the relief that was poured into the economy to keep it afloat until the recovery could occur. We need a response that's just as strong today to keep those businesses alive.
Yeah. And are you hopeful that some incoming centers administration might be able to move on that?
Absolutely. And seeing as how as we tape this interview today, I use the word tape. That's an old-fashioned. As we record this interview today, the Georgia runoff is occurring as we speak, and I am very hopeful that there's going to be a change in the Senate, and there will be. It would be nice if we could just have bipartisan solutions, but the last 12 years has not shown much bipartisan cooperation. So I am very hopeful that we will see some relief coming to state and local governments that can then be translated directly into those places that need the relief the most.
You are listening to the Municipal Voice on WNHH 103.5 FM.
Back to the General Assembly in Connecticut specifically, are there any issues on the legislative agenda for this year that you've taken a particular interest in?
Yeah, I'll tell you one in particular, and I hope it's not going to be too hard to get the legislators' attention with all the the COVID issues that they have to deal with and the budgetary issues they have to deal with. But I've been spending the last 6 months of my time as one of the co-chairs of the it's called the Connecticut Coalition for Sustainable Materials Management, CCSMM.
Okay.
We've tried really hard to come up with a fancy marketing term for that, and just couldn't do it. But what this is it's an effort to reduce solid waste in Connecticut and increase the effectiveness of recycling. And the average listener might be thinking, man, what the heck is he wasting his time on that for with all this other stuff going on and all these other challenges? Well, solid waste management and recycling is actually one of the biggest crises coming up in Connecticut that nobody knows about. In 2018, China stopped accepting recycling materials from the United States. That caused the markets for recycling materials to collapse.
Yeah.
It caused prices to skyrocket. And just to show you the magnitude of what that is, 2 years ago, cities that were selling their recyclable materials for enough profit that they had zero cost to remove waste from the town, whether it's through a contract or through a municipal system. Now we're spending hundreds of thousands, and in the case of the bigger cities around the U.S., millions of dollars that are coming right out of taxpayers' pockets to handle this stuff. And it turns out that when you look into the details, the United States lags the rest of the industrial world in doing things like putting together programs like enhanced producer responsibility. That's a fancy name for getting the manufacturers of products and the manufacturing of the packaging of those products to be made in a way that it's more easily recycled and more easily recovered, so it doesn't go into a landfill or go down to a burn plant. And one of the things that's triggered the Connecticut crisis was the announcement last summer that the Mira plant out near Hartford is going to close probably within the next 18 months to 2 years. That serves, and what that is, that's a waste-to-energy plant that burns trash.
They burn the garbage and turn it electricity.
In the garbage, they create energy out of it, although it's not a very efficient system to begin with. It pollutes terribly. It's not something anybody wants in their backyard. But when this thing goes offline, it would need something like $300 million worth of upgrades to stay in operation. It's aging out. There's no place for this trash to go except back into landfills. Literally, no industrialized nation in the world is still trying to put stuff in in landfills. Just to give you an example, Russia, the former Soviet Union,
Hmm.
which is has a landmass that's so big it covers 11 time zones
Yeah.
and has literally millions of square miles where they could keep burying stuff, has more developed recycling laws than we do in the U.S.
Yeah.
And in the absence of a federal mandate, it's going state by state, and states are competing with one another.
Hmm.
But there will be some proposals made to do things like EPR programs on tires.
Hmm.
So, everybody has seen discarded tires on the side of the road, old mattresses, things like that.
Yeah.
Holding the producers responsible for being part of the chain of collection, making packaging materials in a more responsible way, collecting those materials. There are many, many opportunities to not only clean up the environment, but to reduce the cost to taxpayers as well.
Yeah.
So we are actually scheduled, our coalition is scheduled to produce its final recommendations for the legislature coming up on January 11th.
Hmm.
And that will be forwarded to the leadership of the House and the Senate.
That's great. The China sword policy, which you talked about some, how they stopped taking other countries' recyclables to deal with over there, drove the costs up. But one thing I know, I've spoke with people at the Sustainable Connecticut program and stuff like that. I think this is still true that as far as tipping fees goes, while recycling in Connecticut has gone from something that generated a small profit for towns, now it's costing them, it's still, the tipping fee on recycling is still less than on regular garbage. Is that correct?
Not in all cases. It depends
Okay.
on where you are within the state. In fact, this is a national issue too.
Okay.
The price right now in Western Connecticut, the price for tipping is comparable.
Okay.
One is $94 and the other one is 87, or it just went up to 89. It fluctuates, so it's kind of hard to tell. But what you brought up is a really good point. The tipping fee for and just for the listeners who may not know all the ins and outs of trash hauling, when your local contractor or your city picks up the trash, it has to go someplace, and they're charged to dump that stuff by the ton.
Yeah.
So it used to be that the cost of getting rid of the recycling actually generated some income that would offset the cost of getting rid of the municipal waste. And then it kind of went to zero, but at least it would, you're paying for one but not the other. Now they both cost arms and legs. And it depends again on where you are and who the haulers are and what the local MRFs are charging, and if you have any association, like we're part of HRRA out here on the western side of the state, the Housatonic Resource Recovery Authority, which negotiates for better pricing, but they're comparable. It's still pretty, and the prices are just going up.
Yeah, and this has all happened basically in the last 2 years.
Oh yeah, yep, last 2 years exactly.
That's in government terms, that's pretty fast to kind of adapt. And meanwhile, we've got all this other stuff going on.
Yeah.
Related, not quite the same, but we tried the plastic bag ban last year, which kind of had to get suspended for a little while because people didn't want everyone using reusable bags back and forth during the pandemic.
But we're still going through this in fits and starts. One of the things that was on the docket 2 years ago with the legislature was modernizing the bottle bill, and it is estimated right now the amount of recycling that the bottle bill collects. The 5% deposit on bottles and cans, which doesn't include everything. It's just some bottles and some cans. I think the recycling rate is about 35% on that. And it might be a little generous on that. So it's estimated that taking that up to 10 cents. And by the way,
which most other states are at this point, I think, right?
Oh yeah, Connecticut is way behind on that. But if you move it up to 10 cents, you include things like wine bottles and spirit bottles, if you really want to get aggressive, take the little, they call them the nips, the little single serving things. It is estimated that change alone could move the amount of glass recycled and captured for reprocessing up to close to 75%. And yet, there are so many competing influences that the lobbyists were successful in kind of blocking that, and it never made it out of the committee and onto the floor 2 years ago. And that's one of the things that we really want to see happen.
Lobbyists for who? What industry would be against that?
Well, not to throw anybody under the bus because they have, they're business operators. They have legitimate concerns. But if you are, in the recycling and trash hauling world, there are haulers, the trucks that prowl the neighborhoods.
Yep.
Then there are things called the MRFs, and those are the material processing facilities. Those are the big places where the
people take their stuff.
You put all the stuff in the blue bin. In theory, that blue bin gets emptied into a hopper, and there are automatic sorting machines that send the paper this way and the cans this way and the bottles that way. Well, in the first place, that never worked as well as people thought it did. There was a lot of contamination and waste in that. But the recyclable glass is very valuable for the people who run MRFs.
Yeah.
They would not like to. So what happens if you change that bottle bill and you say, okay, we're if you get your bottle of actual glass bottle, Coors beer or whatever it is, and now it has a 10-cent deposit on it. So instead of just saying, it's not worth my time to get a nickel, I'm just going to throw it away.
Yeah.
They actually, people start taking it to the recycling center, taking it back to their store and putting it in and getting their 10-cent deposit. That reduces the amount of valuable glass that MRF operator is going to collect.
Got it. So they're getting it all, and a certain percentage of it right now is glass, which is valuable to them.
Yes.
And to offset the other stuff that's not as valuable, and they don't want to change that percentage.
That's right. And then to make matters worse, it's only food grade glass that is valuable. So original, they call it virgin glass, beverage bottles, pickle jars, there's stuff that your pasta sauces come in, the spirit bottles, wine bottles, those have value.
Yeah.
Everything else is trash and cannot be recycled, and most people don't know that either.
So you shouldn't put your broken windows in the recycling, or your Pyrex, or
broken windows, broken mirrors, broken drinking glasses, all have plasticizers in them, and they actually, not only do they not have value, if they get mixed in with other stuff like cardboard, they destroy the value of the other material. So those wind up they want those to go into the trash, but the MRF operators would like to keep the value. That's an understandable thing. Again, I'm not throwing them under the bus. That's their business model.
Yeah.
That issue has to be dealt with if we're going to advance.
As part, when we deal with the rest of it, we kind of figure out how to help out the MRFs or change the system there.
Yeah, you can't just say, hey, tough guys. You do have to deal with that issue, but we also do have to deal with the fact that we need to get that glass out of the waste stream and recycle more of it.
Yeah. Recently on the show, we had on Mayor Kurt Lang out of Hamden, and we talked with him, and there's some similarities in Bethel's relationship to Danbury that Hamden kind of has with New Haven as a first-ring suburb of a larger town.
Yeah.
What is your relationship like with Danbury?
Oh, we have a great working relationship. We probably share a bigger border with Danbury than any of the other towns in our area. We collaborate on a variety of things. Our public works departments and highway departments have a great collaborative relationship. If we run out of sand or vice versa, we can get it out of their place and then replace it later. I've always had a great working relationship with Mayor Boughton. I wish him well in his new role. He will be missed in our area.
Yeah.
He's a very flamboyant guy. You wouldn't think so, but he is. He started this thing at the beginning of the pandemic that he calls Live at 5, and once a week he did a live Facebook thing. I actually got to do the show with him the night before he announced his departure to the city of Danbury, and that he was leaving his position. So
to become the commissioner of the Department of Revenue Services, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
For the state.
He's going to be the state's chief tax collector.
Yeah. How do you feel about your friend Mayor Mark being the chief tax collector now?
Well, he'll do a great job. He's a talented guy. He relates well to people. I'm sure that this is an operation where you have to follow the law fairly and equitably and treat people with kindness, because nobody likes to pay taxes, but they all understand it. And I really can't think of anybody who's got a better personality to handle that job than Mark. He'll do a fine job.
And over the last year, have you, Mark, and other towns in the area, have you had to coordinate as far as, shutting businesses and things like that with the pandemic, trying to, not do it on one side of the border so that everyone just goes to the other side of the border kind of thing? Have you had to coordinate those sort of efforts?
Well, no, we haven't really formally coordinated. Through our Council of Governments, through the WestCOG, we call it, Western Council of Governments. For a long time, we've had a weekly check-in call on Thursday mornings where we get on the phone or actually get on the Zoom and just compare notes, compare what our health departments are doing and what our schools are doing, and we'll trade ideas. It really hasn't been necessary to coordinate more on like at a business level because the state mandates, the governor's orders pretty much cover everybody evenly anyway.
Okay.
So we're all doing the same thing. We do share stories like, what do you do about the people who just flat out refuse to follow the law? That kind of, so we've traded some ideas on how to better handle those.
At least had some moral support and someone to just bounce some ideas off of.
Yep, exactly right.
Yeah, you mentioned the WesternCOG before, and you were the first chairman of that COG, I believe.
Correct.
What are some of the biggest issues facing the area that the WesternCOG covers?
The biggest issue I think is I'm gonna give you two. One of them is funding, because the regional services grants that come from the state are never a given. You might get a big one this year. You really can't. It's hard to do any budgeting in a longer term basis than just from one fiscal year to the next.
Yeah.
That's one problem. So the things that they do are very much specifically tied to specific grants, like a grant for a safety study, grant for hazard mitigation on a regional basis, things like that. Beyond that, I would say, and this is my personal opinion, my colleagues may or may not agree with me on this, but to some degree, I think the COGs are still refining their role. What is their role? Some of the wags have theorized that the state's goal is to recreate county government without calling it county government. But nobody wants the COGs to have taxing authorities.
Yeah.
Nobody wants them to really assume that role of county government that would be traditionally what you'd see in other states. So they're kind of a little bit of this and a little bit of that.
Yeah.
They're providing some very valuable services, but what they could do in the future is still a little bit fuzzy.
Yeah, you mentioned the grants and their kind of parallels with the COGs to counties.
Yeah.
And I remember speaking to one of the COG directors, and they were talking about how one area where they would like to be closer to what other states have as counties is that the federal government, I guess, gives out some grants and things based on the county structure, which we don't have.
That's correct.
So if the COGs could function, at least in that regard, it would be good, bring some of the money into Connecticut, kind of.
That is a big issue, and I understand that there's been a real breakthrough just recently that the federal government, through the federal census, is willing to make a recommendation to Congress that the COGs are to be considered the same as a county, because many places around the United States, grants are available to counties because. I'm going to get a little bit wonky on you, but the role of county government is really not policy making. It is an administrative arm of the state, and it's done on a regional basis for greater efficiencies. And we have not been able to take advantage of that in Connecticut because federal government doesn't recognize how we do things here. So federal recognition of COGs to be equivalent to counties for purposes of releasing grant money, it would be a tremendous thing. That would really help. It would not only empower the COGs to do more regional things that could save taxpayers money, but it would really kind of break open the potential for what the COGs could do in the future.
So I guess one kind of final question for you here. We talked about the mess that was 2020. We're talking about kind of some of the ideas from. Is there anything else that you're looking forward to in 2021 that Bethel couldn't get to in 2020 that you're hoping to bring back and get to this year?
Well, we put a few things on hold just because we were so busy. So just locally, some technological improvements. I recently attended a seminar on technologies that are specifically targeted to make municipal operations more efficient.
Mhm.
So modernizing our website, modernizing our online permitting system, modernizing how we do HR administration. There are ways that we can be better and serve our public better with either the same employees or maybe even fewer employees in the future. These were initiatives I've been working on for several years, and really everything got really just put on the warmer burner. It's simmering, but we haven't worked on it for pretty much the last 8 or 9 months, and I'm very anxious to get those initiatives rolling again.
Well, that's great. First Selectman, thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thank you very much. Happy
right.
New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you, and let's hope 2021 is better for all.
That's my hope. I'm sure everybody would agree. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
We'd like to thank our guest, First Selectman Knickerbocker. I'd like to thank our premier sponsors, Digital Back Office, Palo Alto Networks, who you can check out at digitalbackoffice.com and paloaltonetworks.com, as well as our sponsors, Gateway Community College and Housatonic Community College. Learn more at gatewayct.edu and housatonic.edu. The Municipal Voice is a co-production by CCM and WNHH 103.5 FM. Kevin Maloney is our executive producer, Christopher Gilson is our producer, Harry Draws is on the boards, and I'm Matt Ford, your host. Be sure to check out our Facebook page and give us a like, and watch out for our CCM chat series on our YouTube page.